You're listening to the Life Purpose Advisor Podcast, episode 18.
I don't think I believe in a God that is participating in my life in any way, that's actually interventionist in any sense. I think there's a broader wholeness to everything. There seems to be some truth to this idea that everything is connected, but I don't think that I believe in God in that traditional sense, which has been sort of strange because that is a big part of what 12-step programs are about.
You're listening to the Life Purpose Advisor Podcast.
Life purpose, spirituality, higher calling, personal growth, meaningful life.
We ask the deep questions about living a balanced life of meaning, purpose, and joy.
Passion, know thyself, be mindful, spiritual practice, aha moments, life lessons, balance.
It is time to welcome your host, Angie Swartz.
Today I'm honored to welcome Eric Zimmer to the show. Eric is the host of the award-winning podcast, The One That You Feed. Welcome, Eric. It's so nice to have you.
Hi, Angie. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Your podcast is wonderful. I really enjoyed listening to it. And for anybody else that's out there listening, I hope you'll hop over and take a peek or listen to what Eric's doing over there at The One You Feed. Some really amazing interviews. I would imagine, Eric, that you do some other things in your life. Can you tell us about those?
Sure. In addition to hosting the podcast, I've been a serial entrepreneur for years, so I've done lots of different things. I own a solar energy company, and I do some e-commerce consulting work as well at this point. And I've been, over the years, done a lot of different things in the software development industry, software startup companies.
Right. And tell me about The One You Feed. What was the inspiration to start that?
I think, like a lot of things, I just get curious. I just get interested in something and then suddenly think I should go and do it. It's how I ended up with a solar energy company without knowing the first thing about solar energy. But I think podcasting was similar. I somehow just got interested in the idea of it. And then one day I just remember sitting there and the idea for the show just came to me, and I called the guy who's the partner in the podcast with me up and said, "Hey, I've got this idea. Do you want to do it?" And I think we started the next day. So I don't really know where it came from. Like a lot of ideas, it just sort of seemed to appear. But once I had it, I was like, I think that's a really good idea.
Right. And it proved to be a very good idea. Selected as one of the top podcasts of 2014. And how long have you been at it?
I think we are 1 week past our 1 year anniversary. We released our first episode on January 6th of 2014. So we're just a little over a year old. Right.
Big accomplishment. Well, I'd love to have a conversation with you about life purpose. So may I ask you what your life purpose is? Do you know?
I don't know that my life has a single purpose, except that I think if I tried to boil it down, I think it's to be useful. Because I think what I have thought is the most important thing that I'm doing at any time has changed over the years. There's been different projects, different things that I've been involved in that seem like they're my purpose during that period. But I think in general, my purpose is to be useful. And that change, and like I said, that'll change. Sometimes it's to be useful to my family. Other times it's to be useful to other people. I would phrase it probably most succinctly as being useful in a general way.
Mm-hmm. I like what you say about that at different times you thought your purpose was what you were in the middle of at that point in time. Can you tell us what some of those things were? And do you think those were aha moments that pushed you in the direction of where you are today?
An example is when I was in high school, I started a tutoring program for inner city kids where I would get kids from high school students from various suburbs around the city, and we picked a particular area, an elementary school, and we would go in there and tutor those kids, and we started a scholarship program. So at that point, I think I thought that was my purpose, and I think it was during that period of time. Other times I think my purpose has been I'm helping to build a company, or I'm doing the solar energy company, and that's my purpose. I just have never had a lot of success in. And I think it's easy to get bogged down in thinking that there is one. I think some people have it. They just know from a very early age, this is the thing that I'm going to do. I don't know that I've ever really had that so much as I have things that I'm interested in, that I believe in, that I think are important, and I focus on those in the midst of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then something else will come along or things will change. I tend to follow my curiosity and my interest to a great degree. And I think to some degree also my purpose has something to do with simply being alive and being present. I think that's, if you want to get to ultimate purpose, I don't know that there is one that at least I can come to, but that seems to be part of it, is to be, I'm here and am I aware of that, and am I actually alive and paying attention to being alive?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about some things that you do to make sure that you're still being present later on in the interview. But first, I'm interested to know about your life in general. Have there ever been any difficult times or major life things that came up that were pointing you towards different directions, different things to do in your life? Any aha moments?
I think I've had a variety. I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, so I had a couple pretty big monumental moments around that where there were pretty dramatic changes in direction and aha moments to some degree with those. I think that's probably the primary one for me, was the first time that I got sober. I was 24 years old, and as I mentioned, an alcoholic and drug addict. I lived in the back of a van. I was essentially homeless. I had a lot of jail time hanging over my head. And so there was a big aha moment there. And the aha moment was pretty much, I'm going to die if I keep doing this. So that's probably the biggest one. And then I had about 10 years where I was sober, and then I went back to drinking for a couple years and had another moment coming out the other side of that where I was feeling pointed in it, that I needed to change directions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea why that is in your life, like from a purpose standpoint, why alcoholism is part of you?
Well, I think that Jung once said, the psychologist Jung said that he used the word spirits, because people refer to alcohol as spirits, and he said that for a lot of people, spirit is similar to spirit. It's this questing for some sort of deeper connection. And I think I've always had that. And that was a shortcut for me that I use. So I think it does tie into my personality to some degree. I'm also tend to be sort of an all-in kind of person. So I think that fits into my personality. I think the broader way that contributes to purpose in life for me, and I've certainly gotten a lot of satisfaction and a lot of purpose in helping other people deal with those problems. I don't think anybody can help other alcoholics and addicts like other alcoholics and addicts. It's far more successful model than a professional counselor, or therapist type model. So I've gotten a lot, that's certainly part of my purpose, is to help people who are dealing with that. And I think in general it has made me more aware of more compassionate in general with people, and more forgiving of failure. When you've screwed up as many times as I have, you have to be able to overlook it in other people to a great degree. At least it's been that way for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Don't you think that most people in their lives have a fair amount of screw-ups? That's just part of the game, I think.
I think so. Some of us seem to have really perfected that art to some degree. But yeah, I think everybody does make mistakes, and I think we ultimately all wrestle with a lot of the same underlying fundamental things. It's just that for some of us, for whatever reason, those things go to extremes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Was there something that tripped you off the second time when you started drinking again?
I think it was I got very caught up in chasing things in the external world and lost a sense of my inner world. I fell away from any sort of recovery related things with my alcoholism. I didn't have any real purpose except trying to make myself happy, do things that felt good, that weren't drinking, but it just led right back down that path until I was, right. It was kind of a matter, in retrospect, I can look at it and see, oh yeah, that was clearly a long time in coming. And so I think for me, my recovery from that to a large degree is the focus on some sort of internal world. I mean, one of the best definitions of spirituality, and I think that recovery from alcoholism and addiction does have a spiritual component, and I use that term very loosely, but spirituality to me to a large extent simply means recognizing that there's an internal component to our lives and to our happiness, and we have to be paying attention to that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And just to be clear, assume that you're talking about working through AA with a 12-step program and a sponsor.
Yes, it's been a 12-step program, and yeah, it is. We technically are supposed to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, and film. I don't know. I don't really know what this is. So, but yes, I'm a member of that. I've been a member of that group, and had a sponsor, sponsored lots of people. I'm a little bit less involved than I had. Different periods of time, I'm more or less involved. But I think ultimately, what I've learned from that is that sense of finding that internal connection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's obviously a very big aha moment. Anything else that you want to mention?
I don't know of any other. I mean, I have these aha moments where I decide, this is the thing I want to do. Like, aha, I'm going to go start a solar energy company, or aha, I'm going to do a podcast. But those at this point to me just seem to, they're big moments. They're big moments where I decide to do something different, but they feel like part of a broader narrative for me, which is that I just, like I said, pursue things that I find interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for that. So you mentioned earlier you said I will use the term spiritual loosely. Can I ask you what are your spiritual beliefs in detail? Do you believe that there's something bigger? Do you believe in God? Anything else other than what you mentioned?
It's a question I'm very interested in. I think I would probably fall into the true category of being an agnostic, as in I don't know. I'm interested, but I don't really know. My spiritual, I've probably gotten if you look at more traditional spiritual traditions, I think that Buddhism is the one that I've probably aligned with most closely, because I think it talks a lot about things that make a lot of sense to me. I don't know that I do believe in, I don't think I believe in a God that is participating in my life in any way that's actually interventionist in any sense. I think there's a broader wholeness to everything. There seems to be some truth to this idea that everything is connected, but I don't think that I believe in God in that traditional sense, which has been sort of strange because that is a big part of what 12-step programs are about. And so it's been an area that I've had to really deal with. And I think the first time that I got sober, I tried to force myself into that mold. And I just said, I have to believe. And then when something went really bad in my life, I realized that I had this fake spirituality that didn't give me support. So this time around, I had to be very clear about this is what I believe, and try and find a way to translate a lot of things, particularly in AA, that are related to God into terms that made more sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Because if it's not personal, it's really nothing, right? It's just a habit that folks do.
What's a habit? Believing in God?
You're talking about religious beliefs and fitting yourself into a mold that wasn't really fitting with what's in your heart or your higher self, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to believe that there was a interventionist God out there that was taking care of me, and it's just not something that I believe. I think I know a lot of people who do, and I think it's wonderful for them, and I certainly wouldn't go so far as to say that anybody's right or wrong, because I don't think any of us really know. It just has worked better for me. That's not a concept that adds up for me. And I think it was even right in the heart of AA a lot that I really wrestle with this idea that people get sober and recover by the grace of God. And so I would watch people around me dying of this who seemed to be doing the same things, and I would just end up with well, why does that mean that they didn't get that grace? And the traditional questions that have plagued people for millennium when they get into the idea of a personal God just sort of tripped me up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very interesting that your award-winning podcast asks a lot of these questions. You talk, from what I've seen, you talk about a lot of spiritual concepts on your show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I don't think that spiritual is such a broad word that it sometimes almost doesn't mean anything. And it's one of the things I will ask guests sometimes is, what does that mean to you? And it does seem to boil down simply into that idea that there is more to life than sort of meets the eye. And I think that also, if you boil down all the spiritual traditions, all the religious traditions, there's a very core common message right in the heart of all of them that basically is all saying the same thing, which is, to some degree, love the people around you, be a good person, pay attention. They're pretty basic messages there. And so it could just be different ways of saying the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure. How about other tools that you've used to know yourself better? Have you ever been into reading lots of books about personal advancement, about personality assessments? What other things?
Sure. I mean, I read all the time. And always have. So, yeah, I've certainly read a lot of different books on personal development. I've done some of those. Those personality tests can be kind of interesting. Meditation is one for me. I've done a lot of journaling at different times in the past. So, yeah, I do think that I think that life purpose to a large extent is there's got to be a great degree of radical self-inquiry to get a sense of what is important to me, what matters to me, and that can be hard to find sometimes for a lot of people. It certainly has been for me on and off at points in my life.
I like that term, radical self-inquiry. As you mentioned, you're an all-in guy, so self-inquiry isn't enough for you, Eric. It's radical self-inquiry. So very interesting. What are you doing now on a daily basis? What are your practices that keep you centered and present?
Well, doing the podcast, to me, I started the podcast largely for two main reasons. One was I need help remembering that core idea that, like, the world isn't all out there, like it's not all about what's happening on the outside, that there's this inside part of it. I seem to forget that very, very easily. I can get very caught up. There's a lot of, things happening in life, and it's easy for me to kind of go on autopilot. So the podcast for me was really a mechanism to try and keep those things front and center. I figured, well, if I've got to talk to somebody every week about these concepts, and I'm going to read their books and read their articles, I'm going to kind of have this stuff front and center all the time. And that really worked. So that's part of it. Meditation is another part that I do I do every day. So that's another daily practice. And then some other things that I think help me to live a good life and that are, mostly daily practices. Things like exercise is very important to me, mainly from a mental health perspective. And then staying connected to people around me, making sure that I'm focused on connecting with friends and people that I care about, and at least I sometimes just have to bake that in. I have to think and be conscious about it. Or again, several weeks can go by and I realize, like, I haven't really sat down and talked with anybody, a friend, or checked in on these different people because I've been so busy doing all these different things. And I'm sure you've got some idea of what that's like. You have a job, you have a family, you have things that you like to pursue, and the next thing, time can just, year is gone like, that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And particularly when you have children like we do.
Yep.
I was saying to a friend yesterday, once school starts, it's like you're in January before you know it. You blink because all the holidays start and things move so quickly.
Yep, it's amazing.
I want to go back just a minute to your meditation practice. Can you tell us a little bit more in detail? Are you doing sitting meditation? For how long? Walking meditation?
I like to do screaming meditation. I just wake up and scream. It's a new thing. It's a new thing I'm working on. If people are interested, you can message me offline. No, I do pretty standard sitting meditation.
Maybe you should give us an example of that. I'll take out my headphones.
Yeah.
And you can tell us what that's like.
No, I won't. I will not.
Just kidding.
I will not torment the listeners. Yeah, it's pretty standard sitting meditation. Sometimes I'll do walking meditation if I'm falling asleep. There's obviously lots of different types of meditation. The main types tend to be something around finding something to focus your attention on. And so the breath is a very common one, or a mantra is another one. The one that has ended up working best for me is sounds, is that I sit and I try and remain very present to what am I hearing around me, what things are happening, and also body sensation. So I work to be really present in that way. For whatever reason, following the breath was never that successful for me. But once I started doing it with sounds and body sensations, I was a lot more, I guess, successful. Although I think with meditation, success is simply sitting down and doing it. There isn't really any other definition of success.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And are you listening to sounds in nature, sounds in your headphones?
Sounds wherever I'm at. I love to go out in the morning and sit in nature. Those are great, but it's, I don't know, it was like 8 degrees this morning, so that's not happening. I go just wherever I happen to be. A lot of times in the mornings, lately my routine has been I go to meet a friend at the gym, and on the way I stop and there's a church, and I go in and I sit in there and I meditate in there. And there's sounds, there's people walking around, there's bells going, there's cars driving by outside, there's heaters creaking, and I mean, just whatever is around. All I'm really trying to do is remain present. Because I think the point of all those different types of meditations, and the main benefit, I think, of that type of meditation is to allow to not get engaged in our thoughts. It's for me, a thought comes and I tend to follow it, and then I follow it to the next, and I follow it to the next, and it's just all thinking. And so the goal for me of meditation is to stop that, to not get so attached to this. I don't think there's any stopping thinking. I don't think that's possible. But I simply try and remain present to the sound. So I'll be listening, and I hear that, and then I hear this, and then I start thinking, then I remember, I come back, what do I hear? What do I feel? And it's just about coming back to that focus and not allowing myself to go off into endless thinking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you for sharing that in so much detail. I think there are so many people that are interested in meditation or implementing a mindfulness practice, and it feels daunting because, as you stated, it's a common misbelief that it has to be done a certain way or you have to clear your mind. So I love your practice and would encourage anybody out there to start there. What a beautiful thing, stopping in a church and just listening to the sounds that are around you and starting to trying to feel present in that energy.
Yeah, I think what you just said there is so important, because I tried to meditate, or I did meditate sporadically for a long time, years and years and years, and I would start and I would stop and I would start and I would stop, because I think I had some expectation of what the experience should be like. I think I thought, I should feel really relaxed and really blissful, and people talk about how peaceful it was, and it's a lot of the times that's not the experience at all, is of being peaceful. And so when I learned to adjust my expectation of it and go, the point is to just come back to whatever this thing I'm trying to be present. And if I wander off 100 times or I wander off 5 times, it doesn't matter. It's just coming back, and it's a training of the mind. And when I gave up on that there needs to be some experience, like I need to feel something or something has to happen, when I let that go and started, I think about it like brushing my teeth. It's mental hygiene. When I did that, the whole experience really changed for me. And I was able to get really consistent and do it every day. And I started and the other mistake I used to make was I'm going to meditate 30 minutes every day. And if you've got a brain like mine, 30 minutes out of the gate is terrible, because it's just so busy. There's so much going on that I started with 2 minutes, and then I went to 3 and then 5. And now it's, 20 to 30 to 45 minutes that I do every day, but it took a little while to get there. And so I would, those are a couple of things, because I do think it's a very useful practice, but it can be a whole lot simpler than people think it needs to be, or it can be simpler than people make it out to be.
Right. My experience was very similar to yours. When I first began meditating years ago, I had myself in a box as well, and I would sit for 45 minutes and have some very interesting experiences, and it was very productive. But over the years, as I've gotten more comfortable with my own definition and knowing that I need to do what works for me, I'm someone who doesn't like to do the exact same thing every day. So I have a toolkit of things that I try to remember to do something every day. But we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about you today. You mentioned that exercise is a really important practice for you. What happens? What do you think about the physical body as it relates to purpose and being present? What happens if you don't do those things?
Well, for me, if I'm not exercising, there's just something about the physical activity of exercise that has some. We could go find a bunch of different studies and we could talk about the science of it, but the studies seem to be enormously clear that it's very good for the brain. And so I get depressed when I don't exercise. I mean, it's something that I wrestle with anyway, depression. And so that's one of the very best antidepressants that is out there, at least for me. And I think a lot of people in the mental health community will say the same thing. It's the best antidepressant there is. There's something about that, about moving, about energizing your body. And then I just feel better in my body after I exercise. For some reason, that's a hard lesson because then I just won't do it for a while. And then I'll be like, why do I feel crappy? Oh, yeah. So it's just one that I try and work in. And I think the reason that that stuff ties back to purpose for me, whether it be meditation or exercise or trying to eat well, is that if I am very distracted by not feeling good, whether that not feeling good be physically, whether it be mentally, whether it be emotionally, that tends to become the focus of my attention in my life, is feeling lousy. And that makes it pretty hard to have a purpose. If my purpose in general is to be useful, I'm not very useful if all I'm doing is walking around thinking about how lousy I feel all the time. And so those are the ways those things relate to purpose for me, is that it sort of just wipes those, it gets me to, I just would call it like a level playing field where I'm at a pretty good functioning level where I can be of use to other people versus wrestling with whatever the various inner demons I happen to have at that time.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we can do another interview and we can meet all those demons, but I'm sure that would be very fun for you.
Yeah.
You. How about money? Do you make more or less money now that you're aware of your purpose? I'm not sure this question fits so much for you, but before, when you were less present and not as useful, what's the answer to that?
I don't spend a ton of time thinking about that. I get asked all the time, how are you monetizing the podcast? How are you? And honestly, right now, that's just not the priority that I'm spending a lot of time on. I think I'm fortunate in that I have a career, or sort of a career. I do e-commerce consulting work. I do a variety of things that I like to do pretty well. It's work that's challenging. It's work that pays very well. It gives me a lot of flexibility. So I don't know that money and purpose tie together. I don't know that they tie together too much for me. I don't think I'm great with money. I tend to have an easy come, easy go attitude, which is not always great. And I guess it's maybe because it is, it seems to come relatively easy in certain cases, but it's not an area I'm as conscious of as I probably should be.
Well, it doesn't sound like you need to be more conscious of it.
Well, ask me in about 30 years when I'm trying to figure out, why am I living on the streets? But
well, you're not going to be living on the streets, I'm sure. May I ask you a lightning round of quick, short answer questions?
Assuming I can give a short answer, sure. We'll give it a shot.
I'll help you.
Okay,
how about
that's
that? I'll
perfect.
help you. Do you think passion and purpose are the same things?
No.
Do you think everybody has a life purpose?
Yes, depending on how we define purpose.
And how would you like to define it?
I think that everybody can find purpose and meaning are two words that are sort of interchangeable. I think that everybody can find meaning in their life if they look for it. And I think it's everybody's job to define their own meaning. That's just part of what being a human is. And I think it can be there for everybody, but sometimes it's challenging to find it. And it may not be this giant grand thing like we always think it will be. It may not be something that looks like it should be, have a movie made out of it, but there is meaning available for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being high, how important is following your own joy in igniting your purpose?
Boy, these are not short questions. 7. 6. I'm going to go with 6.
That's a short answer question. Did you ever quit your job to follow your purpose? And do you think somebody needs to quit?
I have, and no, I don't think that people need to quit. I think this sense that everybody needs to quit their job and be a life coach or teach an online branding class, and that's I think that there's a big movement around all that, and I don't think that it's right for an awful lot of people. So no, I think you can find meaning and purpose right in the middle of whatever it is that you're doing. I also think it's fine to want to try and do something that resonates more with you, but at the end of the day, everything at a certain point becomes a job to some degree, right? There is hard work to be done in anything that we're doing, and there are going to be tasks in that we like and tasks in that we don't like, regardless of what it is. And the question is really, what is the mentality we're bringing to the tasks that we're doing, regardless of who we work for? There's the ability to find. Sometimes I find that purpose, and I'm not being short, but I can find purpose in doing a consulting job by simply my purpose is that the people who I'm doing consulting with, their careers rest on getting these projects done. And so my purpose is to help them succeed. And I think that's a really important purpose. These are real people with real families, real jobs. And that is that's a noble purpose to try and help those people succeed. But it's not it's not what the traditional follow your passion looks like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if that's true. It might be more like what the traditional. It's just not what the marketed follow your passion is. But I think there's a lot more of that out there than we hear about. The guy that's polishing shoes to put his children through college to be the first ones to graduate from his family. That's a clear purpose there.
That's absolutely. I think I like that analogy a lot.
So thank you. What brings you great joy?
I think what brings me great joy is being engaged in things that I'm doing. I seem to be happiest when I am truly engaged and focused on what I'm doing. And I've had this curious experience over the last few years where I've started to realize that comes sometimes in places that I wouldn't expect that it would, but I'll find myself going, why? I feel really happy. And I'll go, why? Because I'm completely where I'm at, and I'm completely focused on what I'm doing, and I'm not wishing that I was somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Quite the gift those days.
Yes.
If you unexpectedly amassed a good-sized fortune, what would you do differently?
I would spend more time probably doing things around the podcast that I'm doing. I think I'd spend more time focusing on this sort of inner work, whether it be with myself and with other people, and I would spend more time playing music.
Very nice. What should listeners learn from your life?
Well, I think there's been plenty of examples in my life where you could learn both good and bad things. I would say that the lesson that I take, the big lesson I've learned in my life, again, is, and I've said this a bunch of times, is this idea that there is really an internal aspect to our life. That's not to say that there's not an external aspect, but a lot of us are very focused on chasing what's out there, the job, the car, the house, whatever those things are, and that to do that at the neglect of what's going on internally can lead to some pretty bad places. And at the very least can lead to a real sense of, I've accomplished something and yet it doesn't mean anything to me.
Right. Yes, I've been there too. Been there for sure. Do you have any books or any resources that you'd like to recommend to everyone? What are you reading right now that's turning you on?
What I am reading right now is, I just got done reading a book for an interview I did last night with a woman around rethinking positive thinking. I think that there would be two books that I would say were really revolutionary to me. One was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. It's a classic book for a lot of reasons, and there's just so much wisdom in it. And then the other is a book by a Buddhist nun named Pema Chodron called Start Where You Are, which is another book that was profoundly transformational for me.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. I really love the work of Stephen Covey as well, and I think I like The Eighth Habit, the book that he wrote after that one, as much or more than I like the first one.
I haven't read that one. What is The Eighth Habit?
Incidentally, The Eighth Habit is to find your purpose and help others find theirs.
Well, that would align very well with your podcast. It's too bad that old Mr. Covey isn't around to come on your show, because he would be a stunningly good guest.
Right, he would for sure, and he, as you mentioned, he's not here any longer, but some of his staff and his grandson are working on some of his work still, so that's not completely out of the question, so we'll see what happens with that. But I'd love to send our listeners over to take a look at your website. Can you tell us what that is?
Yep, it is oneyoufeed.net, and that's all spelled out, so it's ONEYOUFEED.net.
And if they'd like to listen to your podcast, they can find you on iTunes?
They can find me on iTunes, or they can go right to oneyoufeed.net. You can listen to the podcast right from the webpage. You can click through to iTunes. So either one will work. Yep, we're definitely on iTunes.
Great. Well, thank you very much for spending time with us today. And mostly thank you for being so open and so candid about your life. I know that there are people out there listening that are struggling with some of the same things that you have struggled with in your life that will find great inspiration from your candor.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
My pleasure. We'll see you on iTunes, sir.
All right. Take care.
All right. You too.
Bye. Bye.
This is Angie Swartz. Before we end our podcast show today, I wanted to just thank you so much for your time and let you know how grateful I am that you're here listening with us. You make all the difference in our programming. We'd love to hear from you. You can stop by our Facebook page at facebook.com/Life Purpose Advisor to give us your feedback about how you like this show and anything related to personal growth or life purpose. We're happy to answer your questions there. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.